Welcome to Parenting Solutions for Teen and Preteen Education and Behavior, the show for parents who want real root cause solutions for learning, stress, and behavior at home and at school. Hosted by educators Mike Tyler and myself, Ryan Kimball, each episode gives you practical tools you can use right away to get results. Before we dive in, grab our free ebooks, the Parent's Survival Guide, and the Good Choices booklet. Use the click here link right in the show notes. Okay, let's get started. Hello, everyone, and welcome to another episode of our podcast. Today, Mike and I are going to be going over something that I think will be very applicable and maybe give parents and students a bit of relief and maybe switch things around so that they have a different look at what might be going on and causing there to be trouble with school, behavior, etc. So this is a subject of arbitraries, which I'm going to let Mike define in different ways, and then we'll walk through how this applies to life and livingness. So over to you, Mike.
Okay, so an arbitrary, simple definition is an opinion given by an individual entered into a situation, okay? It basically comes from the word arbiter, which is another word for judge, and the uncertainty of a judge's decision, long history ago, this is an old Latin term, leads to the definition of basically, the word is used now to mean something that's uncertain. It's just something that's a piece of information that's entered in by somebody, and it doesn't necessarily bring any clarity to the situation. And so that's an arbitrary. And an example from school would be, well, who's judging, for instance, this child's progress in any particular subject? Well, teachers are there to make these calls, make these judgments, and that's what they're there for. But let's look at how a teacher's decision could be modified by somebody else putting an arbitrary there. Maybe that teacher has been given an assessment, a reading assessment, that has been supplied to them by a pharmaceutical company, or a pharmaceutical company that's posing as a curriculum publisher, right? And the curriculum material not giving a child enough practice to become proficient is then overlaid with this assessment tool that turns out the result that, like, well, they've got this condition and it needs to be treated outside of the classroom, or we're going to insert this treatment into the classroom. Okay, and now we're getting into medical terminology and drugs and stuff. And this has nothing to do with studying, right? And it has nothing to do with making the child more familiar with whatever it is that they're trying to study. Okay, so there's an arbitrary that's entered in that is a false solution. And there's another specialized definition of arbitrary, which I'm going to read. It's 2 sentences, really. The definition as given here in one of our books is: an arbitrary is a false order or datum, a datum being a single piece of information, okay? An arbitrary is a false order or datum entered into a situation or group. It is something entered without reason. End of quote. So it doesn't follow any reason to label the child with some condition just because of some assessment and say, well, now we have to bring in this outside handling for the situation. It's false. It's not true. Anybody can learn anything, and how familiar they are to start with will determine how fast they're going to learn it. And yes, of course, there are physical limitations and various things that go on. I mean, if somebody's legally blind, they're going to have more difficulty learning how to read than somebody who's not legally blind. Right? And I have great reality on that with watching my brother and his wife raise a child who is legally blind, and yet she is an amazingly intelligent person. She's a great student, and her parents never bought into the idea that she can't learn. Okay. She's an incredible learner, right? She just needs a little bit more assistance with certain things than somebody else does. And that's going to be true for any individual. Okay. The kid from the farm is going to have a different set of familiarities than the kid who grew up in the city. Okay. And so they're going to approach different subjects with different recognition and speed of learning and so forth. But these are all individuals, and you just approach it on an educational basis and use educational tools, not entering in some pharmaceutical tool, quote unquote, and then we're going to get results, and we're going to have successes.
That makes so much sense to me. As you were talking, I was actually thinking I was one of those students who tested very well in school. And so I had this kind of false sense of my ability and intelligence, just to be frank, coming out of school, because I had a good GPA, pretty much, not the top of the class, but close. And it was all because of testing. I just tested extremely well. But then I got into the real world, and I found people who maybe didn't test as well, or they didn't have those type of grades, but they were competent in life, and they were able to get things done. And I think it was actually an arbitrary of the grading system that made me think that I was in a position that I wasn't, regarding how I was going to be able to handle life. And I kind of had to start over again in a lot of areas. So, and it was just a place or something that I thought of as you were talking about arbitrary.
Well, you and I were in the same boat. I was doing terribly in math in this elementary school that I went to, a Catholic school that I went to. I remember in fifth grade, even like getting into the teacher's grading book and like changing like a D to a B or something, or trying to, or something like that, because I was not doing well. I was already as a fifth grade or something, recognizing that I'm not making it, right? Right? But then I get into a public school in seventh grade, and I tested out, and somehow I'm put into an enriched math class. I'm now in this like advanced, I'm in like the I don't know, but the geek class, the enriched math class. I'm now in an enriched math class. We never did go back and clear up whatever I was confused about in fifth grade, or rather fourth grade, that I never learned, right? Whatever it was. But I'm like elevated into this enriched. So all of a sudden I'm just, wow, yeah, I'm really advanced. And I had some of that same stuff going on right all the way through high school. I could memorize things and test out things, and which then justifies just other pursuits. We'll just call it that for now. Other pursuits besides actually being there, dedicated to learning and becoming competent, right? Which I learned about much later in life, right? So yeah, same thing. It's a real problem. So both probably the person who's arbitrarily assigned some higher value and the person who's arbitrarily assigned some lower status are both in an improper position with regard to what's actually going on.
Exactly. Yeah. And I've seen that in real life, being an adult and needing to make things work. Speaking of how arbitraries misinform us and then lead to just scenarios that we weren't ready for, or that are different than we expected. When we were talking earlier, kind of had an aha moment about the labeling of kids with certain disorders, which you touched on earlier, and how that label can then lead the kid to feel that they are a certain way, which they may or may not be, and cause the parent to then pursue other ideas they would never have considered, like, well, he's been labeled with ADD, ADHD. Therefore, it's a possibility he may need this special type of class or treatment or even drugs or something like that. Can you go over how the concept of arbitraries fits into that system, for lack of a better word?
Sure. I see it and hear it all the time. Like I said, tools have been supplied to schools and teachers and administrators and so forth by the pharmaceutical companies to do what? To sell drugs, basically. And it's a false solution, as contained in that definition of an arbitrary. It's a false solution that's entered in by somebody else who's not there trying to teach the child. And so labeling somebody with, there's all kinds of fancy ones. Some of the most common ones, yes, attention deficit disorder, attention deficit hyperactivity disorder, they're learning disabled, blah, blah, blah. I mean, there's even one, this is straight out of a medical book. Let's see if I can remember the exact wording of it. Mathematical computation disorder, right? Mathematical computation disorder. Really, that's a medical term, right? You can look it up, Google it, right? Right? It's straight out of an official textbook, a handbook. And that label isn't good. What's the treatment? The treatment is medication. Okay. Well, labeling somebody who hasn't been taught how to do math, then you might as well label a 6-month-old child with, like, oh, I don't know, walking and just walking with skill, walking and ambling, fancy word, right? Walking and ambling disorder, right? They can't amble, they can't walk, they can't sally, they can't do a lot of things, right? Well, yeah, because they're 6 months old, right? They're supposed to be, crawling around and learning how to. Any parent has been through this by the time they get to our educational, address, right? It's like, you can't just label the child and say, well, they have a walking disorder. They haven't learned how to walk. They have to, let's get them standing up and doing things and holding on to people's knees and couches and things and all the stuff that goes into, helping them grow up, right? You can't just label them as having this disorder. And that's true for any subject. You go, wow, they're terrible. They're much, much better at math than reading. It's like, well, yeah, okay, they just haven't been taught, or vice versa. It doesn't. That's not helpful. It's that arbitrary, that label of that they're good or bad, or they're fast student or a good student or a bad, that they're a fast learner or a slow learner in any individual subject or as an overall condition, are all just arbitraries to, does the person have familiarity and certainty of these steps that lead up to being able to do these things? And if they're having trouble with step C, well, let's look at step B and step A. Okay. So that's how I see it.
No, I've actually experienced how that is true for me by, just associating with you and learning more about grammar and whatnot, even though I had a background in learning about it, and the simplicity with which you went over things like the names of objects and places and all that, nouns, right?
Sure.
And I think it's true. It's kind of just, and again, my opinion, it's a lazy way out. And it's a way not to really look at that individual child and go, okay, the reason you're having trouble with advanced math is because back in 5th grade, you didn't learn how to add numbers more than 2 at a time, right? And then that child gets that fixed, and all of a sudden they no longer would have that label. But as soon as you do that label, it's like, oh, well, this person has this disability, and we're no longer going to go back and look at why they can't do the advanced mathematics or understand grammar or whatever it is. So it becomes this way of grouping people and not looking at them individually, finding out what's wrong in the past.
Exactly. And just to carry that mathematics computation disorder a little further, let's go into like, well, what would the remedy for this disorder be? Well, of course, it's medication, right? You could probably Google around and find out, well, what's the most common medication for mathematical computation disorder? I've never bothered to, because I'm not that interested in finding out what the drug pushers are selling, right? But certainly, if it's being addressed as a medical condition or psychiatric condition or whatever, it's like, well, okay, you're going to medicate the child. Is that going to teach them math, though? Is that going to improve their ability to learn math? I think my brother, who is a high school math teacher, would say no. I'm pretty sure he would say no. That if you're going to teach somebody math, teach them math. Okay? Don't just label them and say, well, we're going to treat them for mathematical competition, which is just an apathy. You're down at the level of like, well, we don't even care anymore about trying to teach them math. It's like you said, it's just a convenient way out of like, let's not bother to find out what they did learn or didn't learn in third grade, fourth grade, fifth grade, eighth grade, etc. Why they're having trouble over here in 10th grade. Right? It's just, well, we'll just label them, drug them, and then just let them know that, like, well, they have other things that they can pursue besides learning math, right? Let's get them involved. They're really good in drama class, so let's validate that. There's nothing wrong with drama class. There's nothing wrong with validating their abilities in these other areas. But it's just, as we started out talking about, it's just an arbitrary and false solution to label the kid and say that they can't learn that area.
Exactly. And I even have to bring up, because, you and I both have, I guess you could say, an alternative health background. And,
right.
We're thinking with supplements and nutrition and these type of things to help with behavior and whatnot. And I've even seen in that field an agreement, or at least there isn't another way of looking at it that we know of these labels. And then, okay, we're going to give you something that helps boost the brain, or something that helps you think more clearly. And again, nothing wrong with supplements. I actually take a ton of supplements, and could probably rival anyone else in how many supplements I take. But the point is that in itself is also not the solution. Not that your child should be eating well. It's just like a given. Maybe they do need to take certain supplements that boost their ability to intake certain B vitamins or whatever that helps with, being alert and all that. But the real underlying cause is not a lack of supplements. Just like you said, that's why I thought of this. As like, you can't take more supplements to learn math. It's not like you're going to take enough supplements, all of a sudden you're going to understand how to do these advanced mathematics, right? So I kind of thinking that as you were saying. And so it's the same thing. You still, yes, make sure your child's healthy, but get to the root cause, find out what was missed back when. And I know you've even mentioned sometimes it's not in the subject that they're currently having trouble with. You've mentioned many times the inability to read something could lead to not being able to understand pretty much any subject someone is trying to learn and become competent in. So I just wanted to mention that. I think that's very applicable, especially to our audience to understand.
Absolutely. And I love your analogy, the supplements the supplements might be needed and helpful to supplement a diet that's based on food that's available now from modern agriculture in America that could be lacking. Okay, great. Well, good. Let's source out better food. Okay. There's a slogan going on now in America, eat real food. Right? Mike Tyson just recently signed on with that message, eat real food. Okay. Well, what is real food? Well, there's a whole educational approach right there, a whole subject to take up. But, eat real food, supplement it as needed, keep clarifying your sources and all that sort of thing. But let's not confuse that with, does the person know how to read? Okay. And they're struggling, maybe the child is struggling with social studies. Do they know what a sentence is made of? Right? Do they know what a sentence is made of? Have they graduated from sentences to paragraphs to chapter books, etc., in some kind of a logical sequence, and have mastered the earlier steps? Not just they sort of know about it, right? Can they take a simple idea and make a simple sentence out of it and then keep adding concepts to make bigger sentences? Do they know how these things are hooked together? Okay, have they been taught these things? If not, don't bother to find out why they're struggling in any other subject, because they're reading about these things using the language, the English language. Okay, so let's make them masters of that first, the structure of it. Okay, so that they can then branch out and read books on their own, of their own choosing, about, things that they want to pursue, whether that's science or the arts or whatever it is, whatever direction they want to go. Let's enable them to pursue that stuff on their own by making them masters of the language.
Love it. Absolutely. So we're going to wrap it up on that. I think that this could help and hopefully does help any parents or students listening navigate this world of arbitraries and open this up as a way of looking at what we're trying to help you with this podcast, and give you some tools to do that just by having a better understanding of the possibilities here. So thank you everyone for listening, and stay tuned for our next episode. Thanks for listening to Parenting Solutions for Teen and Preteen Education and Behavior today. If today's episode helped you or resonated with you, please share it with a parent who needs to hear it. And don't forget, you can download our free ebooks, The Parent's Survival Guide and the Good Choices booklet. Just use the click here link in the show notes. We'll see you in the next episode.